Good evening. I'm Margie O'Leary. We are here for our audit committee meeting on November 6th, 2023. All board members are present. We have a full agenda for tonight. First, we're starting with our audit from the Bonadillo Group. Feel free to use the podium and introduce yourself.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa Ellis. I'm the external auditor with Bonadillo Group. I was also the senior audit engagement. In front of you, you'll see the audit package of everything that's been delivered to you today. We recently completed the audit, and I'm here today to go over the report in detail with you and answer any questions that you may have. There are 5 deliverables that we have provided to you. The first is your financial statement. The second is your required reports under the uniform guidance. The third is your audit of the actual financial statements. And the fourth is the required communications letter. And lastly, the fifth is the management letter. Again, please feel free to stop me if you have any questions as we go. So first, I'm going to start with the required communications letter, and everything should be in order of how I'm going to present. During the fiscal year, the school did not adopt any new significant accounting policies. There were no transactions for which there was a lack of authoritative guidance or consensus, and all significant transactions have been recognized in the proper period. The most sensitive accounting estimates reporting your financial statements were your depreciable lives of capital assets, your other post-employment benefits, your overhead liability, your compensated absences, and net pension assets and liabilities related to deferred inflows and outflows of resources. These estimates apply to the government-wide financial statements only. Our role as your auditor is to evaluate these estimates and ensure that they're evaluated and considered reasonable. There were no significant difficulties in performing your audit or dealing with management, and there were no disagreements with management. In terms of management consulting with other accountants, we did not know that the district had consulted with any other accounting firms. In our discussion with management, we're in the course of normal professional relationship with them, and no responses of ours were conditioned based on retention. So I'm going to go over your financial statements quickly. So if you can please pull open your financial statement packet, the bigger one, please. Looking at the table of contents, you'll see 7 sections. The independent auditor's report, the management discussion and analysis, your financial statements, your required supplementary information, your supplementary information, sorry, required supplementary, and then regular supplementary, your other information, and your required reports under your government auditing standards. So first, I'm going to have you flip to page 64, please, which is the last page of the report. Here you will find the schedule of the findings and questions costs. This page summarizes the results of our audit. So as you see here on page 64, we are issuing an unmodified opinion that the financial statements are presented fairly in accordance with GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, upon the board's acceptance. This is the highest level of assurance we can give. We did not identify any material weakness or significant deficiencies in internal controls over your school district's financial reporting, and there were no compliance findings to report. Your general fund unrestricted unreserved fund balance did exceed the 4%, which is on page 59. This gives a breakdown, but we did not report it as a non-compliance due to the amount not being material. Now I want to put you back to page 1, please. Okay, so on page 1 is the independent audit report. It provides our opinion. We are issuing an unmodified opinion that the financial statements presented fairly in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles upon the board acceptance. This is the highest level of assurance, again, that we can give. Management's responsibility is they're responsible for the preparation and fair representation of these financial statements in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States. The auditor's responsibility, being our responsibility, is to express an opinion on these financial statements based on the audit. Our audit involves performing procedures to obtain audit evidence and the amounts and disclosures in your financial statements. We perform transaction testing over your internal controls, as well as transaction testing substantively over accounts receivable, accounts payable, cash, debt, etc. So next I'm going to have you go to page 4. Pages 4 through 13 is your MD&A, your management discussion and analysis. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but if you don't have time to read the full 64-page report, this has all the highlights of the financial key heads. All right, so next, in your financial statements, you have two sets of financials. You have your school district-wide statements and then your fund level statements. They both present two entirely different pictures. The school district-wide statements present a full accrual basis, while the fund level presents a modified accrual basis.
Teresa, can I ask?
Yes.
So on the decrease in total net position of the 3.9 million or so, this was an issue, remind me, Jim, last year, wasn't it, where we weren't entirely aligned on how to treat the, I think it was that OPEB.
OPEB is the major factor of that decrease, yes, because it adjusts the values because it's a 30-year liability that they put on there, and that's the estimate from the actuaries.
Okay, great, thank you. Yep, so on page 14 is your school district-wide financial statements, statement of net position. Your net position at June 30th, sorry, I'll wait till you guys get there. Your net position at June 30th is 60.8 million. Your current assets at June 30th is 11.9 million. Capital assets at June 30th, 20.4 million. And your long-term debt liability at June 30th, 88.6 million. Page 15 is your statement of activities at the government-wide. Again, the change in net position increased to 3.9 million. Some of these highlights, like Jim just mentioned, is the 4.5 million OPEB expense that was recognized. You have 722,000 of pension expenses recognized. 1.3 capital assets are capitalized. 1.1 million of depreciation and amortization. 830,000 approximately of debt was paid down this year. And then you guys had a $395,000 debt that was issued during this fiscal year. So pages 16 to 17 are your fund level financial statements. So general fund is the major fund that we reported on, which ended at 8.6 million for the year. 6.4 million of your restricted fund balance in your general fund relate to various reserves that you have. Approximately 971,146 is under assigned, which also includes your encumbrances. 676,000 of that is appropriated for the subsequent year's expenditures. 1.28 million of your unassigned fund balance. Again, you're limited to the 4% of the school district budget in your unreserved unappropriated fund balance, again, which is on page 59, showing that breakdown.
So can I ask a question about that? When we approved the budget, we were right at the 4%, right? And then did we get that extra state or federal money?
So whenever you go through an audit process, there are going to be little adjustments. And as she mentioned, we're a little over, but because it was not material, it wasn't a significant efficiency. I can always be more conservative and say 3.9, and then we might not hit the 4, but I always try to hit it at the 4 if I can. So.
Okay.
The fact that it's 4.28.
Right.
Does it become something that you need to pay attention to?
When the comptroller's office is scheduling the next audit. Pretty much.
Yeah.
There's generally no
Right,
enforcement.
it's typically 5%, like, so that 4% window, 4.25, 4.7. It's when you start getting, because they say 4% is where you go. Some boards, they go much higher than 4%. They go 5, 6, 7.
Right.
Some go 10, right? We try to stick right in with where the regs are, which is 4%. So within that 4 to 4.9 is really where we want to live. Because again, as Jim says,
comfortable, we're not going to have any problem.
no, it's not
It's outside of our.
Nope. No, 4.28 would be no issue, because again, it's an estimate of where Jim works on it, and then after it goes through the audit, some slight changes. It's not a true, like, you get to that final point. But if it was 5.5 or 6, it would go against where the board would want to be, if we said 4%.
And during the pandemic, we exceeded it by way over
Yes.
4%.
Knowing.
Right, but it wasn't an issue, as far as I know.
As long as you are conscious about what you're doing and can explain what you are doing, generally you're in good shape.
Generally.
Sorry, go ahead,
You're
Teresa.
fine. And then we reported your non-major funds on page 57 and 58 of the report. These non-major funds include your capital projects fund, your special aid fund, school lunch fund, debt service fund, and miscellaneous special revenue fund. Just highlights on these funds: capital project fund balance was 568,158 for the year. Special aid fund balance is 0 due to the nature of that fund. School lunch fund balance had $199,658. Debt service fund balance had $307,299, and miscellaneous special revenue fund balance was $180,639. I do want to note that the general fund's revenues and expenditures are reported on page 18, but I'm not going to go back to detail right now. I'm going to go over it in a little bit. So I'm going to continue with 5758 for now, going into the revenues and expenditures. So your key highlights for your capital project fund, you had 1.2 million of capital expenditures during the fiscal year. And again, you issued a new bond in that fund for $395,000 to purchase buses. Special aid fund, your revenues and expenditures equal each other. Your expenditures for the year for special aid was $887,000 approximately. School lunch fund, your expenditures exceeded your revenues by $13,000. Debt service fund, this fund is made up of cash and cash equivalents of $307,000 approximately, with revenues relating to interest and earnings for approximately $9,000. Miscellaneous special revenue, your revenues exceeded your expenditures by $8,096 for extra classroom activities. And I'm just going to briefly touch upon your fiduciary fund financial statements on page 2021. This relates to what the school district collects and disperses out on behalf of another entity such as tax collection. So then pages 22 to 51 is your notes on the financial statements. I'm not going to go through these in details as these are standard footnotes to your statements. Next, I want to go through the budget in actual for the general fund on page 52 to 53. Revenues, actual revenues for the year was $27,000,009 compared to your budget of $27.4 million. This brings you to a favorable result of $497,000 with more revenues than budgeted. Your expenditures, you had actual expenditures of $28.6 million compared to budgeted $31.1 million. And again, including your encumbrances of $294,611, this brings you to a net favorable result of $2.2 million. Again, fund balance grew for general fund $372,000. Following these reports, I'm not going to go into detail, are your pensions and OPEB schedules that are unaudited. These are required, so we'll skip over them. Page 57, 58, again, we already discussed your non-major funds. Page 59, we discussed your 4% detail there. And then page 60 is your unaudited capital project schedule that is required to be reported on. The next deliverable I'm going to bring you to is the required report under government auditing standards, which is located on page 62 and 63 of this report. This is a government auditing standards report. This report requires us to gain an understanding and report your internal controls over financial reporting. We noted no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in the financial reporting over internal controls. The second part of the report is your compliance with laws, regulations, and grant contracts. That non-compliance could lead to a material effect on the financial statement. We note no instances of non-compliance material to your financial statements. Next is your deliverables on the required reports under uniform guidance. That's a separate small package to you. So the big things here is your independent audit report on compliance of each major federal program and controls over compliance with pages 3 to 5. Type of audit report issued on compliance of these major programs was unmodified, which again is the highest level of assurance that we can provide you. Page 7 of this report is your schedule of expenditures of the federal awards. The district had spent $929,444 in federal dollars. And the major programs tested was the COVID-19 Education Stabilization Fund and the Child Nutrition Cluster. Again, these are summarized in the results of the report. So moving on to your extra classroom report, next deliverable. We also issued the school district's annual extra classroom financial statements. We issued an unmodified opinion, again, highest level of assurance we can provide you. Total fund balance ended at $116,156 as of June 30th, 2023, compared to $109,000 in prior year. And then lastly, we issued a management letter comment. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but some observations in extra classroom that we've noticed, lack of support such as receipts. Again, this is pretty common across the board with all of our schools, so it's not unusual, but we did do a letter this year. Year-end closing, we did receive a few extra trial balances, which kind of made us stop and go in the beginning, but once we got it all cleaned up, we were able to move on with the audit seamlessly there. And lastly, just interfunds, we had a few adjustments that we had to help out, reconcile, And then OPEB, we just noted a few instances of documentation that we couldn't, audit. So that's really everything I have. The only thing I want you just to know is the required communications letter. We do have an attachment A this year, which is just transparent on the material entries that we had to book. So it's just be transparent. That's everything I have.
And most of those were related to gas meetings.
Yes, and most of those related to GASB 87. That is correct. So again, I want to thank Jim and Christy and the rest of the business office for everything that they've helped us get to the end of the audit. If there's any more questions, I'm happy to answer any.
Anyone have questions?
Try to keep in your 15-minute line.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you
Thank
coming.
you so much.
you.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Great.
A lot of information.
Yeah. Next up, we have Scott Quest now. Did I say that correctly?
Close enough.
Close enough? Okay, feel free to correct me when you get up. So in our last board meeting, we had talked about, our last audit committee meeting, we had talked about doing some foundational education on Title IX. Scott is one of our attorneys and graciously agreed to show up tonight and give us a bit of a primer.
So I wasn't given clear sort of exactly what you wanted to talk about Title IX, but I understand a little sense of it. In its simplest form, Title IX is a law I deal with quite a lot. It's our general anti-discrimination law under federal law relating to sex, and it principally relates to sex in the field of education. So what we're talking about is it can take a number of different forms. It's a law that's designed, and let me take a big step back. 1972, we just had our 50th anniversary of Title IX last year. Very important law if you think about 1972. There was absolutely not equality of opportunity amongst all female and male students. I would challenge that statement. And so the federal government stepped in and basically said that if you're going to have educational opportunities, whether they be here at the pre-K level or you're at the higher college level, it has to be equal opportunity. Again, as simply as you have to let men and women into your institution. New institutions we're not currently letting both sexes in. But then obviously it expanded very quickly to athletics. And that's been the large focus of it. I would say really in my career up to maybe COVID days. I think Title IX took on a little different of a role in its prominence under our last presidential administration, because that's when we saw the most dramatic change to the law we've seen in quite some time. And we're now seeing a bit of a back and forth over Title IX and how far it stretches and how short it tracks year to year. So it's a basic law that says you have to ensure that your students all have equality of opportunity. And that, I think, is the hardest part about Title IX. It's about equality of opportunity, not a black and white, apples to apples, oranges to oranges comparison. So, and please stop me along the way if you have a question about this. The agency we deal with most as your counsel in Title IX is the U.S. Education Department's Office of Civil Rights. That's the group of folks, most of them are down in New York City, who are responsible for enforcing Title IX. We can get Title IX compliance issues in a number of different ways. We see it a little different at the college level, where we do have things like gender-based violence. That tends to be a little more of an issue at the college level than we do see here at the K-12 level. There could be basic claims of sex discrimination that are being treated differently or negatively because of my sex. What we've seen more often in schools is the Office of Civil Rights investigate allegations that schools are not treating male and female athletes, that they're not enjoying the same athletic opportunities. And this typically comes up when a school adds a new sport. That's the most common area where we see it. The Office of Civil Rights comes in, they perform an investigation in their wisdom to determine if there is or isn't an imbalance in the opportunities. I've been involved in many of those investigations. They're tedious. We begin by reviewing some basic information. I actually did bring the board an example of an information request I get from them. This one was only 20 categories of different things that totaled about 2,000 pages of documents. They want a lot of the things you can expect. They want to look at your policies. Do you have policies that promote and encourage equality of opportunity? More recently, do you have policies that provide the appropriate procedures for students? And that was really where there was the greatest expansion under the last presidential administration, an expansion of what is required when you receive a complaint of a violation of Title I. And so that group, they ask you for documents and things, but they will also want to do an inspection. They come to every one of your athletic facilities, whether it be your gymnasiums, your athletic fields, your off-site athletic fields, if you happen to use them. They inspect all of your equipment. So they expect boys and girls, men and women, to have essentially the same level of occupancy. So they even look at, for example, what is the thread count of jerseys of one group versus another group? Is one using rayon and one using cotton, and is that a good thing or a bad thing? They count baseballs and softballs. They look at how often teams get new uniforms. They look at the coaches, what are the quality of the coaches. They look at all of these things. And I have spent days and days and days on site counting how many softballs and how many baseballs there are. At the end of the day, it ultimately comes down to a hit. It comes down, and this is the advice we give clients when they call us and say, we're thinking about adding a new sports team or a new piece of equipment or a new athletic facility. What do you think? Is that going to create a problem under Title IX? We always say, in terms of number of teams, how many all male versus all female sports do you have? In terms of athletic equipment, when was the last time you gave a similar team other new equipment or new jerseys, those sort of things. So we go through all of that during the inspection, and ultimately the way it usually fleshes out is there's an agreement that's reached where we try and curate the control now.
So in the athletic context, because we've talked about this before, you have a program like football where the equipment is very expensive, has to be replaced more frequently for safety reasons. And then you could have a sport like girls basketball, right, where it's uniforms and basketball. So in terms of equality of opportunity, how does the Office of, what are they called, Civil Rights, how do they view funding discrepancies?
So the OCR recognizes that you have a sport like football, which has more personnel, a bigger team, you have more coaches. The equipment has legal requirements in terms of its conditioning, so you can't go a year with this 2 years with the same football helmet as opposed to a basketball, which you can use 2 seasons in a row. And they recognize it. They walk in the door knowing football is going to be a more expensive sport. You can't look at how much money you put towards that and compare it to basketball. What they try and do is avoid those sports. What they usually look at is basketball to basketball. Think of volleyball to volleyball, men and women. So they try and compare those as much as they can. It starts to fall apart a little bit once you get to baseball and softball. Fields, a ball and a bat and gloves. So they do tend to compare those. There is no comparison for football. In most schools, in terms of the size of the field and the related facilities, everything about it is just more and more and more. So they do tend to look at that and say, okay, that's its own creature over there, football, but only men are on the football team. So that's a boys' sport. So one boys' sport, and a girls' sport to balance it out. I mean, it really, we go through torturous exercises trying to avoid that, but in my experience, and I can only speak to that, it is inevitably comes down to that's a boys' sport, you need a girls' sport to balance it out. So,
how, if at all, does like spend on from outside groups like booster clubs?
Great point. You had one of the 3 things in my head. So booster clubs are really great sources of money. You can use all of the booster club funds you want, provided they're being used. But they do nothing to limit your responsibility to ensure equality of opportunity. Here's what I mean. The last one of these I did, the boys baseball team had insane booster. They were raising crazy amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they had a beautiful baseball field. They had a clubhouse. They had a concession stand where they sold things. They made even more money. The girls softball team, they practiced on a garbage field that was used for local neighborhood ball, constantly flooded. They had no concession stands, no nothing. And what the defense was, well, wait a minute, the boys baseball team has this crazy booster. That's where they get all their money. And the answer is it doesn't matter in the eyes of the law. At the end of the day, it's the district's responsibility to ensure equality of opportunity. And if funds coming from a booster club that throw off that balance, you have one of two options. We have two options. You can come up with the money to balance that out, or unfortunately, you have to say to that booster club, I'm sorry, we can't accept your money. And I have had to give that advice. I hate it. It kills me, but we've had to say that if we use that money, that's going to throw off the imbalance, and we cannot do that.
Are there categories of expenses that are, or is it sort of just, it's everything?
Again, you
Because like
get into
field quality, or are there extra things like warm-ups that aren't required for a sport?
anything.
So it's anything.
OCR looks at everything and anything, warm-ups, the dinner at the end of the year, the award ceremony, do they get a ride on a bus? There's some crazy examples from national cases where teams have been sent on Lear jets because they have, I'm serious, where they have to say that, look, we're spending so much money on the boys' sports that we have to put some of that money towards the women's sports, and there's no reasonable place to put it, so let's just give them a blowout banquet or leather Letterman's jackets, or, you know, just almost needless expenditures of money to try and balance that out. So, you know, that's.
So Scott, what's the conservative advice there? Is it turn down the money, or is it pony? Like, I would think pony up could lead to district spending on things that are not normally district expenses.
Yeah.
Or can you tell the booster club that if you're going to accept, let's say, your $100,000, they have to understand that it's going to be divided between two teams. And if they
That's
don't,
not
if
awfully
they,
well received.
but if they want to donate it, that's the way it has to be, or they cannot donate it.
We've had all of those conversations.
So-
We've had to say that, look, if we accept this money, it has to go towards, you know, boys baseball and girls softball. And you can imagine the reaction is, but they didn't raise the money. We say, do we know it? Or you are right. Sometimes you are having to come. Rarely have we seen that. Rarely have we seen districts spend more money than they.
But what if the booster club is a booster club for both teams, both genders of teams, and its spending is not equitable or not equal between the teams? Is that something that the booster club is doing it directly? Like, let's say they're doing warm-up jackets that are a higher thread count for one group than the other.
You know, if you have.
It's a great question, because I would just say, I just said to RJ and she looked at me and we said the same thing. That's a policy question, right? If you're
Right,
talking
this
about
is
booster
you guys were
clubs
talking about this.
and the funds that go into it, then that leads to policy, correct?
Mhm.
If I'm understanding you, yes. I mean,
You can make a policy that says you can only donate money or support the teams if it's being done equally, or else
You
we will
could do
not
that.
accept the.
Because often they're not donations, right? Often those are direct things that are purchased for an athlete, and it doesn't, we don't accept it as a donation,
Correct.
right?
So that,
So we have no. we don't-
Oh,
that gets into some tricky
Yeah.
territory.
We don't accept it.
And that's usually
Right.
something.
We don't
comes
see those
up.
show up on
People say,
Yeah.
well, what if the booster club does it totally on their own? You know, what if the booster club holds a banquet off-site and we have no district folks have nothing to do with it? We have no liability for whatever happens there. We don't send it out through school resources. That's their own thing. There's a strong argument that is not now your responsibility as far as your imbalance. That would be an argument I would make for OCR.
let's say, Scott, that we have a booster, I'm just gonna use way far-fetched example, hypothetical.
Sure.
We have a boys and girls soccer booster club.
Okay.
And the boys get warmers, right? The jacket, like the warmers that they go, and the jackets that are all warmed, and the girls don't. We don't accept those as a school. They're a gift to the soccer program. The board doesn't accept them. Now, is that,
Like, we haven't.
or is there an issue with
You know,
that or not?
there's a stronger argument that when the money's not flowing through the district, that it's not subject to Title IX. Again, I'm saying stronger argument, meaning you might be paying me a lot of money to make that argument. So I'm like, right out of the gate, I don't like that. I don't like having to make arguments.
But what
So,
about, and they're
but
taken
there's-
out to team dinner, like the girls are taken out to team dinners
I guess-
and the boys are not, or vice versa.
I get into it like this. If I decide, because I coach little time,
Yeah,
but if I decided when they were a little older, I said, you know, I'm gonna take two of the kids out to the team for dinner. It's not a Title IX concern. You know, if I decide I'm gonna take the whole day out there, there's again not a Title IX concern. It's my money. Once it starts becoming formal, once you start having district accepting that money to then distribute it, that's where you're on the bubble for Title IX. So somewhere before you accept it, there's some safety zone where you could have some money spent on players, and if there were an imbalance, arguably it wouldn't be the district's responsibility. Let me give you a little sense of the Office of
Before you do that,
Civil
can I ask one question?
Well, let me just say this, and I'll let you ask your question. The last inspection I did with the Office of Civil Rights, I had to explain to them how many yards are on a football field and how many goal posts are on a football field. Now, again, these are folks that are investigating compliance of your website on Monday and special ed, IEP compliance on Tuesday and a race discrimination claim on Wednesday and this on Thursday. So I give them a little bit of leeway. They got a lot of ground to cover. But that's who you're dealing with. That's who comes out here and is going to be asking these sort of questions. They're not going to get deep into the crevices of, well, if the money came through the booster, the money was spent outside of district funds, so the ergo, they're not going to do it. They're going to say the boys got nice warm-ups and they're going to say you got to figure that out. Yeah.
Contextual question. When I saw this on the audit committee agenda, I didn't know why it was there. I appreciate it. It's a great conversation, but do we have a problem? Are we anticipating a problem?
Well, I can answer this. We don't have a problem, but the conversations come up regarding athletics and equity regarding budget. So we talked about this last year.
Yeah.
So in order for us to have a better conversation with it, we should at least have knowledge of what it is, what the law states, what those things are. So when we're having the conversation now in the future, we can only say, all right, now we understand where the issues are, where equity is, what the law states, what other litigation has been out there. So when we're having it, we're well informed. That was kind of the thought process behind having.
There's not been an existing challenge.
There was a challenge a few years back.
But not now.
And we've done a lot of work to be able to overcome that challenge. But I think the question still comes up, as I still think people are asking, is there an issue? I believe that's been a question last year. I believe it still might be a question this year. So we still want to go through that.
I think we had a question as a school district that we were providing, were we providing equal opportunities for? And you said sex, that's what the Title IX is about, sex, not gender. Just
Well,
clarifying.
you're venturing into where the law is headed. Currently, there is an effort to extend the protections of Title IX to gender identity.
Okay, but for now, we're
For
not
now,
going there.
it's not
For
there.
tonight, I just want to say that we had a question, boys versus girls opportunities a few years ago. We've been working towards making sure, keeping track of that and everything. But there could also be a question that's been brought up in audit, and I think moving it towards policy about how we, as a district, look at the incorporation of booster clubs into the athletic and maybe other communities. There are booster potentials for booster clubs in every aspect, the Friends of Music. And so, and probably others. So that is, how does the policy committee work on policy, and how do we as a board work on, talk to the, think about that concept.
Yeah, and I think we started in audit because of the funding, our mandate, right? So examine our spending. And the booster club question in terms of what expenses are appropriate for a booster club versus not is a lingering question that we haven't yet tackled head on. And that's why we wanted this primer in terms of what does the law require, and not just in the context of athletic, as Rachel said, but also other programming, right? Where this could come up.
Yeah, I would say as far as boosters, the first thing you want to do from a policy development standpoint is know where booster clubs are spending money. I think that's first and foremost, which is if they're going to be donating funds and spending money on your athletes, you should know that. And you should have some way of accounting for that so that you know if in fact the girls soccer team is throwing the most blowout bash you can imagine, and the boys are getting, crackers with some Sprite cheese. Again, it's not supposed to be, it shouldn't be as simple as that, but I can tell you if that were the allegation, the question to me would be, show me the documentation which shows what you did for the boys that year. Show me a boys team that had that level of banquet, and if there wasn't, then it would be a tick on their little ledger. We got a little imbalance. Do we have anything to balance that out? Well, the boys got really great warm-ups. Okay, that would balance it out. Does it really balance it out? I don't know. It seems we're just sort of making it. I've never this is my opinion. I've never felt real confident in any of the OCR Title IX audits I've been in, that we've actually gotten to the root question is, do we have overall athletic equality of opportunity, as opposed to there's 5 unisex sports, there's 5 boys sports and 5 girls sports, good, 5, 5, 5, we're even.
Yeah, I don't think we were comfortable with that either, just in terms of saying, okay, we have 5 girls sports and 5 boys sports, and we have 80 kids here and 85 kids there. Well,
It gets weird too, because you take gymnastics. It's a unisex sport, often not, but it's a unisex sport category. So is that going to the boys column or the girls column? If there's 1 boy and 19 girls, is it still go in the boys and girls column? There's no right answers, there's no wrong answers, there's kind of a smell test. But I can tell you, the one example I had, which OCR looked at, and they said, no, is they looked at one school, they had a baseball stadium, it's the one I referred to, that was unbelievable. I mean, you could bring in a minor league team and they'd go, wow, this is nuts. And when we went to the girls at softball field, I said, forget it, we're done there. This is terrible. I mean, it really was flooded at the time of the OCR investigation.
But Scott, I think this is important. It's helpful for me when Jim and I talk about budget and we're looking at how this stuff works, because then we can look at what is our rotation of uniforms.
Yeah.
Is there equity within our rotation of uniforms? When we're looking at large scale equipment buys, as a district, we can put a standard operating procedure in place, even though we might have one already, but like the codified operating procedure showing how we then do those things. So like that's a check and balance in budget development. And I think based off this conversation, I think we can easily codify something based off of practice. But this is really helpful for me to understand how it's then looked at from like their point of view, and then how we as a district can look at it and then evaluate our practices in a way that someone else would come in and look at it.
Having those sort of systems in place are tremendously helpful. When we looked at the uniform rotation, it became a non-issue. Right? Like it really just knocked that one out of the box. So yep, this team gets it, and this team, and this. It was, and they were consistent too. That was the good thing, which we found out they actually adhered to that schedule.
So in what other context have there been Title IX challenges?
Title IX, we've really seen, from policy development standpoint, the biggest change to Title IX has been the procedures required for responding to complaints of discrimination or harassment. I'm going to give you my opinion here for a minute. Okay, what largely happened was under our last administration was there was a theory that the procedures that had really been outlined were not as deferential to the accused as they were to the accused. And so there was an effort made to strike a balance between the due process rights of the accused and the accuser. There are criticisms on both sides of that argument. And so there were regulations that were put in place that became very detailed. You probably adopted a new Title IX policy that said, here's the appeal, here's the, like the things you have to agree to, the standard of review. Are you going to use substantial evidence or preponderance of the evidence? I can buy you get 2 lawyers here. We'll debate those 2 for a while, and I bet you we'll come up with a different answer. So those sorts of things were put in place to try and get that pendulum back to the middle. That was at least the theory. Some folks felt that pendulum swung a little too far. So now the pendulum is swinging back. So we're going to maybe see some easing of those requirements for due process. Again, that pendulum, that is going to keep going back. It's not going to stop. Because fundamentally, you just have 2 completely different views of how people are treated under that. So what you're going to need to do is kind of keep on top of that issue. And we try to do that by letting you know when there's been significant changes so that you can go in and take what should really be, by most accounts, 4 or 5 page policy to now you're just probably 20 pages.
On the agenda for tonight.
I mean, it's incredibly. So, that I think is one of the biggest things. As far as substantively, the rules against sex discrimination are largely the same. Someone asked, I think, Rachel, you might have about, gender identity. I think that's the future for it. Though, you have to understand it's a national law. You got to get Congress behind it. That's going to be tricky on that issue. I'm reading today, President Biden might try to do that through executive law, so with executive orders. That's it's a stretch to some scholars. So those are the kind of things coming down the pipe, really. Procedure, the gender identity issue. Those are the two big ones, as I see.
All right, anyone else have questions for Scott?
I had a quick one. So it's a Title IX officer's responsibility to ensure a district is in compliance with Title IX? Or no?
They actually, yes, so your district should have at least one compliance officer. That's the nomenclature under Title IX. We always recommend you have two. We typically recommend one female and one male if you can, for reasons I could bore you with. But we typically recommend two. You're minimally required one. This is someone who needs some level of training on Title IX. They need some ability to be able to recognize Title IX issues and investigate them when they either see them or they come to their attention. And someone who is abreast on the training and policy requirements of the law. So that again was another one of the newer requirements, that you have a dedicated person who is knowledgeable on this topic. I will say, as I've worked in schools and compliance officers for 20 years, and more often than not, it's a principal who drew the short stick. You know, so and I've had schools bring me in to do trainings of their compliance officers, which is great if you can do it. You know, just to even say, okay, this is what a compliance officer is. This is what you need to be aware of and what you need to stay on top of. Most important changes to the law.
And so most boards, to make sure they're in compliance with Title IX, do so through policy and procedures.
Usually someone's appointed. It's not typically a paid position, but someone, it should be formally appointed. They're the person who should be identified by the district on your website. Policy, though, again, you're going to be updating your policy a lot if the person changes a lot. I mean, I have seen a lot of policies where I look at the compliance officer list and someone doesn't work there anymore. That's not a good look. But yeah, it should be someone who understands the job and goes and is willingly doing it and understands that. Not just, oh yeah, that's our compliance officer job.
Do you find most districts have like certain reports they run to try to look at this, or it's more of a?
Folks have a lot to worry about. Title IX compliance doesn't tend to be something that percolates to the top of your attention with a lot of frequency, in my experience. So it's something you're legally required to have a compliance officer. Schools often do it. Somebody says, I'll take the responsibility, and then it kind of just moves on to the next of the issue. But what we found is that's unfortunate when an actual situation hits and the compliance officer says, I'm the compliance officer, but I don't know what to do. That's not the best option. So, you know, if I could wave my magic wand and, you know, I could train every compliance officer, just even say, when you get that first complaint, here's what you do. You call me, and we'll walk you through it. Yeah.
Sounds like Title IX is very prescriptive, and we don't have a lot of discretion.
You do and you don't.
I mean,
It's
as
one of
far
those
as a
things.
policy, if we were to track the law very closely, we're probably right there where we're supposed to be.
The federal government has put out, the U.S. Education Department has put out a model policy.
Yeah.
It's like New York State's anti-harassment policy. They put out a model policy. What I would tell a client is, you can create your own. You can find out the hard way that it doesn't comply, or you can adopt a model policy and just insert your name in there.
That's what I'm getting at.
So yeah, it's hard for us whenever a government agency that's an oversight agency gives us a model policy or a model procedure. You can imagine what our recommendations. Can't go wrong following it.
I just wanted to say one thing specifically with what Tricia asked, is that one of our board goals is equity and policy within the district. So not even only our Title IX officer, which is myself and Karen Jones, by the way. So we do that piece. But one of the goals of the district is that we evaluate our programs for equity and inclusivity, and that includes all of our spending, through that and gender. So it's not only just one person's responsibility, it's the responsibility of the district based off of the board goal. So that's the reason why you're here having this conversation with us, because it's helpful.
Appreciate it. I hate when I have to come here and talk about pending litigation. So this is nice.
Yeah, we want to avoid that.
But that's the whole point of that. And let me just say one last thing is, in the court system, we don't see a lot of Title IX. It's legally speaking, it's a road you can go down, but most people don't. For one reason, there's no attorney's fees under it, minimal damages, if any. So it's not a real valuable thing. It's really where we see with the administrative agency. We see it with the Office of Civil Rights. They're aggressive in fits and spurts. So, but Title IX audits are very expensive. One of the things I didn't mention they do interviews with coaches, then they do student focus groups. So they will bring in a group of students and they'll say, do you like your coach? Do you think your coach you could do with a better coach? If you like new equipment, wouldn't it have better equipment? So, and it causes a lot of turmoil. So better to avoid that. I'm glad to hear you're thinking proactively about that issue. That's great. But if you need anything else, let me.
Scott, thank you so much for
Thanks,
coming.
Scott.
We
Thanks,
really
Scott.
appreciate it. I think that was incredibly educational and we'll probably be bugging you with more questions as we go through this. All right, so we went long, but I think it was well worth the time. So let me just tick through the rest of the items. Jim, Christy, if there's anything you want to comment on, jump right in. So item 3 on our agenda was the minutes from our September 11th meeting. If anyone has comments, questions on the minutes, feel free to send them along. Claims auditor reports, there were 3 exceptions and then a handful of other issues.
Correct.
Anything to add?
Nothing all that significant. It was really timing and whether or not it was included in a maintenance contract or not, and that's so.
Okay, great. Current function level summary document, I didn't really see any issues. I think the only place where we were over budget may have been on professional development, but I think we anticipated that for the Wonders course.
Correct. We shifted some money there. Yep.
Okay, great. And then, did you want to comment on the budget calendar?
Budget calendar, we updated and fleshed it out a little more so that we can see what the process is and who all is involved and how much we actually do go through to try to develop a budget. Not much more to say than that. There are specific deadlines for certain things like advertising and when we have to have a hearing, et cetera, but those are all included.
Okay, good. And I noticed we moved back by a week, right? You had it,
Yeah.
right?
Because it's the 3rd Tuesday. Last year, usually what we do is we shift a day, but because it shifted a day, it had to then shift a whole week.
Okay,
So
not a big deal. Sure, we can all make it work.
It just threw us off a little bit.
Yeah.
since it's the 3rd Tuesday in May, it's always one of
And
those.
again, I think real quick is we wanted to change the budget document to kind of show all the back end things that happen also, because, it's not, the budget just doesn't automatically appear. A lot of work gets done prior. So we wanted that information on the budget calendar so people understood there's processes involved into it.
Great, thank you. And then the last item we have is school lunch fund profit and loss, running at a deficit, quite a deficit.
It is. They were one less day of serving in September, and also, had to buy food, get school up and running.
Yeah. It is what it is.
That's
But I
normal
think
for
we know
September.
this
So
is gonna happen. All right, I think that concludes our agenda. Our next meeting is scheduled for December 4th, and unfortunately, that day, I believe I will be virtual. I'll do my best to make it.
we can almost shift it to January if that's needed as well. So that it's kind of, that's one of those things that it could be December or January. So.
Great. All right, thank you. Thank you.